Good evening and welcome to Washington. I'm Doug McKelway in for Bret Baier. South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley and charter schools advocate Betsy DeVos have reason to be especially thankful this holiday season. Haley will be the new U.S. ambassador to the United Nations when Donald Trump takes office. DeVos will run the education department. They join Mike Pompeo, Jeff Sessions, and Lieutenant General Michael Flynn in the growing Trump administration. Correspondent Peter Ducey is in Palm Beach, Florida tonight with details. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Doug. The president-elect's cabinet will not just be filled with people who have supported him from the start. He's adding some critics, some friends, and some others that are impressing even his most bitter rivals. The man Trump once called low energy had high praise for one of his nominees today. Jeb Bush tweeted, quote, "Betsy DeVos is an outstanding pick for Secretary of Education. I look forward to her bold leadership at the U.S. DOE. Mr. Trump has a role in mind for at least one of the other people he beat in the primary. He asked Dr. Ben Carson to serve as HUD Secretary. Carson said today he thinks he's got what it takes to clean up inner cities, but has not definitively accepted the job." Additionally, the president-elect tapped South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who was a major detractor as recently as a few months ago, to serve as the U.S. ambassador to the UN. And another of 2016's fiercest Trump critics, Mitt Romney, is still under consideration to be the next Secretary of State. But that bothers early Trump backer Mike Huckabee, who thinks a Romney apology is in order before a job offer can be made.
He attacked him on a personal level about his character, integrity, his honor. Well, when you do that, there's only one way that I think Mitt Romney could even be considered for a post like that, and that is that he goes to a microphone in a very public place and repudiates everything he said in that famous Salt Lake City speech and everything he said after that.
This holiday weekend, the next president presented new positions on some major policies, including global warming. Back in 2012, he said, quote, "The concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make U.S. manufacturing non-competitive." But in response to a question Tuesday about whether or not humans are responsible for climate change, Trump replied, quote, "I think there is some connectivity." Mr. Trump also seems to have adjusted his stance on waterboarding. During the campaign, he said this:
"Waterboarding is fine, but it's not nearly tough enough, okay?"
But now his position is more in line with the man who could be his next defense secretary.
General Mattis is a strong, highly dignified man. I met with him at length, and I asked him that question. I said, "What do you think of waterboarding?" He said, "I was surprised." He said, "I've never found it to be useful."
And today, someone else added his name to the mix of highly decorated officials ready to serve the 45th president, General David Petraeus.
You know, I've been in a position before where a president has turned to me in the Oval Office in a difficult moment and turned without any pleasantries and said, "I'm asking you as your president and commander-in-chief to take command of the International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan." The only response can be, "Yes, Mr. President."
In the last hour, the president-elect released a Thanksgiving message where he says he knows that some people out there are still upset about the results of the election, and he knows that raw emotions will not heal overnight, but that he hopes that while folks are together over the holidays, they can figure out a way to move on so the country can move forward together. Doug?
Peter Ducey in Palm Beach tonight. Thank you, Peter. When Haley was announced earlier today, she became the first female and first minority to be nominated to a cabinet-level position in the new administration. Tonight, we learn more about the governor from correspondent Kristen Fisher.
I will always be the proud daughter of immigrants.
When South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley was sworn in, she became the state's first female governor. And today she became the first woman to be tapped for a top-level post in the Trump administration. In a statement, she said, quote, "I always expected to finish the remaining 2 years of my second term as governor, but that when the president believes you have a major contribution to make, that is a calling that is important to heed." Her last 2 years as governor made her a role model for racial reconciliation, something with which Mr. Trump continues to struggle. In 2015, she was praised for how she handled the mass shooting of 9 black parishioners at a church in Charleston. The next month, she signed a bill to remove the Confederate flag from the state's capital.
The Confederate flag is coming off the grounds of the South Carolina State House.
That led to Prime Time, the Republican response to the State of the Union, and she used it to take a swipe at then-candidate Donald Trump.
During anxious times, it can be tempting to follow the siren call of the angriest voices. We must resist that temptation.
In February, she was an aggressive surrogate for Marco Rubio in her state's primary.
Donald Trump is everything I taught my children not to do in kindergarten. I taught my two little ones, you don't lie and make things up.
By March, she'd become one of Trump's targets on Twitter. The people of South Carolina are embarrassed by Nikki Haley. Haley responded with her signature Southern charm, "Bless your heart." She then endorsed Ted Cruz after Rubio dropped out. But by the time it was all over, she'd once again become a role model, this time for reconciliation within her own party.
While I won't pretend to have always been President-elect's biggest cheerleader, I did vote for him, and I was absolutely thrilled to see him win.
In a statement today announcing her nomination, the president-elect said Governor Haley has a proven track record of bringing people together. She is also a proven deal maker, and we look to be making plenty of deals. Now, at first, the governor of South Carolina might seem like an odd choice for ambassador to the UN, and she doesn't have a ton of foreign policy experience, but her state is home to a growing number of companies with clients all over the world, like Boeing and BMW. Doug?
Kristen Fisher tonight from our newsroom. Thank you, Kristen. There are increasing concerns tonight about what the president-elect could, would, or should do about a business empire that many feel creates a conflict of interest with his new job. Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry looks into that tonight.
Even as President-elect Donald Trump insisted he doesn't care about hotel occupancy rates or making any more money, he was defiant in an interview with the New York Times about not completely disengaging from his business empire.
The President of the United States is allowed to have whatever conflicts he wants, he or she wants. But I don't want to go by that.
Mr. Trump added, quote, as far as the, potential conflict of interest, though, I mean, I know that from the standpoint the law is totally on my side, meaning the president can't have a conflict of interest. For Mr. Trump's critics, that sounds dangerously close to what former President Richard Nixon infamously told interviewer David Frost when he declared, well, when the president does it, that means it is not illegal. Beyond the echoes of Nixon, it's a 180 for Mr. Trump, who said back in January there'd be a total separation from his business if he got elected.
I would probably have my children run it with my executives, and I wouldn't ever be involved because I wouldn't care about anything but our country, anything.
While his son Eric suggested earlier this month all of the children would be taking on a much larger role at the Trump Organization. President-elect suggested otherwise to the New York Times, that he's not pulling back from the company, even as he insisted he will not be focusing on properties like his new luxury hotel in Washington. Mr. Trump noted he has more pressing business a few blocks further up Pennsylvania Avenue, though foreign diplomats are already snapping up hotel rooms, leading the Democratic National Committee to charge, quote, he fully intends to use the Oval Office to expand his family's wealth. The president-elect was pressed by the Times about whether he used a meeting with Brexit leaders to discuss how wind farms may interfere with the views of one of his golf courses.
I might have brought it up, not having to do with me, just, I mean, the wind is a very deceiving thing. First of all, we don't make the windmills in the United States.
The president-elect also defended a meeting he had with his business partners from India by saying he was just taking photos with friends and is entitled to still be a human being as president, though a broader question may be how much time his business distracts from his legislative agenda. Doug?
Ed Henry here in Washington tonight. Thank you, Ed. Well, let's find out now how President-elect Trump is doing so far. According to conservatives, Michael Needham is the chief executive officer at Heritage Action for America, and he joins us now from New York. Mike, good to see you.
Great to be here.
Well, first off, I want to talk to you about the most recent picks. Let's start off with Betsy DeVos, nominated for Education Secretary. Your thoughts?
I think it's an exciting pick. She's been somebody who's been a strong supporter of school choice her entire life, and we're very excited to see her. She'll do a great job. It's a further sign that President-elect Trump, who I think ran as probably the strongest pro-school choice candidate the Republican Party has ever had, is committed to that policy priority. It's very exciting for conservatives.
And let's move on to Nikki Haley, the UN ambassador, governor of South Carolina.
Yeah, I think she's an incredible face for the United States. She'll be a great ambassador. You know, when you think of the job of a governor looks at all sorts of issues, looks at the different interests that are out there, and tries to find a way to pull interests together and get things done. That sounds a lot like an ambassador. I think she's going to be an incredible ambassador. She'll be great at the United Nations.
There is one potential conflict there, I see, and it has to do with trade. We've heard all about Donald Trump's hardline stance on trade, but South Carolina is a state which is absolutely busting at the seams with growth in large part because of international international trade. You've got BMW and other foreign car manufacturers moving there. You've got a bustling port city there. You've got Boeing, which has built the new Dreamliner plant and expanding that plant as we speak. It's exporting a lot of airplanes to countries like China. In fact, I was involved in a background discussion with a very high-level senior executive at Boeing last May, and here's what he said about Trump's trade plan. Quote, "We just recently announced that we're going to open a 737 finishing facility in China. The fact that we're opening a finishing center in China allows us to sell more 737s in China, which allows us to grow U.S. jobs." What do you make of that?
Well, you know, I think President-elect Trump actually talked about it in that New York Times interview yesterday that you mentioned earlier. What he said is he's going to have companies build factories and bring jobs back to America by having a robust pro-growth economy, by cutting taxes, by cutting back on regulations. And so I think that's the approach that really unites people on all sorts of these issues. You're exactly right. Governor Haley was an incredible jobs governor for South Carolina, done a great job there. And President Trump is aspiring to be a president who brings lots of jobs back here. So I think there's more alignment there than it may appear.
Any storm clouds on the horizon that you see?
Well, you know, I think not really. I think so far this transition has gone very, very strongly. There's still some important points to make, and then you know, the real work starts on January 20th when he gets sworn in, getting some executive orders done, making sure that we respect religious liberty for all Americans, tell the Department of Health and Human Services to stop torturing the little sisters of the poor, getting the EPA to roll back some of these huge expansions that President Obama has done of some of their rules. So the real work starts on January 20th, and so far all the signs are positive.
I want to ask you about another potential pick at this point. We're talking about Governor Mitt Romney as the potential Secretary of State. It seems like he is the front runner, although Rudy Giuliani also in the running. I want you to listen to what Newt Gingrich said and what he spoke to Tucker Carlson last night about this.
Romney wanted to be in President-elect Trump's job, you know, and to what degree would Romney, once he became Secretary of State, represent himself going around the world? Trump's got to have somebody at state who's very tough and very willing to take on foreign leaders.
Is Romney the right man for the job?
Well, I don't know about that. That's a choice for President-elect Trump. I mean, I think it's clear that if Mitt Romney were Secretary of State, he wouldn't be representing himself. He'd be representing the Trump administration. He'd be representing the United States of America. And I don't think it's fair to imply otherwise. But this is going to be a very personal choice for President-elect Trump. Obviously, he has a long-standing relationship with Mayor Giuliani. Obviously, there would be you know, some strong signals sent about unity on the right to select Governor Romney. So I think they'd both will be in the running, and that's a choice for President-elect Trump. But Mitt Romney would be a great Secretary of State if he were chosen.
I want to ask you about one more thing, the nuclear option or limited nuclear option. Some people say that Harry Reid sowed the wind and now may be reaping the whirlwind as a result of that. Do you expect Mitch McConnell to keep that limited nuclear option in effect for any executive position below Supreme Court level?
Well, I think that, first of all, President-elect Trump is going to nominate somebody from his list. I think it'll be incredibly exciting. It'll be important for the Supreme Court. There's actually other ways to make sure that that person gets across. There's something called the two-speech rule in the Senate, which makes sure that no senator is allowed to give more than two speeches in the course of a filibuster. And so I think the filibuster has proven to be an important mechanism in the past. It saved conservatives from all sorts of outrageous things that Barack Obama and other liberals could have done. We should do everything we can to preserve the filibuster while making sure that Harry Reid isn't allowed to block somebody from the court. I think the two-speech rule might be the best way to do that.
But is it a potential sledgehammer that McConnell holds over the heads of Democrats should they choose to make things rough for Supreme Court nominees or for, say, Jeff Sessions?
Yeah, it's definitely a sledgehammer, and I think that you know, it's reported that the Majority Leader McConnell has made it very clear to Harry Reid that this nominee will, in fact, get on the court. That's very important to do. I think that as conservatives, we should do everything we can to achieve both goals through the two-speech rule. You know, you think about what Barack Obama could have done for the last 6 years without the Senate filibuster. It's pretty scary.
Mike Needham of Heritage Action, thank you very much. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Doug. Thanks.
We are now 2 weeks past the election, but there are many people out there who have not given up on seeing Hillary Clinton in the White House. It has to do with the folks who have the real final say on who gets to be president. Senior political correspondent Mike Emanuel explains tonight from the White House.
Many Democrats are having difficulty letting go after Election Day, even though Hillary Clinton conceded the race.
We must accept this result and then look to the future. Donald Trump is going to be our president.
Clinton supporters note she won the popular vote and she earned 232 electoral votes. Some suggest if Democrats could win over 38 more, Clinton could still be the 45th president. They point to the fact only 25 states and the District of Columbia require their electors to back the winner of the state's popular vote. Today, Jill Stein of the Green Party called for recounts in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest told Democrats yesterday it is time to move on.
The election's over. The debate about the consequences of that election has been resolved, and the president is following the will of the American people and fulfilling his institutional responsibility.
In fact, Earnest confirmed the president and president-elect have spoken by phone since their Oval Office meeting. Yet retiring California Senator Barbara Boxer and New York Congressman Charles Rangel have both proposed legislation to scrap the Electoral College system. And retiring Senate Democratic leader Harry Reid has called for hearings looking into the Electoral College.
It's unusual in such a short period of time in this young century. We've already had 2 elections where the loser got more votes than the winner. So I think it's something we should look at.
Yet a retired Ohio Democrat congressman and Fox News contributor says party leaders ought to blame themselves.
I think the Democratic Party lost its bearings years ago when it started to take money from corporations, corporate interests.
Last week, Clinton called on her supporters to fight for their values.
I ask you to stay engaged on every level. We need you. America needs you. Your energy, your ambition, your talent. That's how we get through this.
The White House view is come January 20th, there will be a new president, and a key responsibility in the remaining days is making sure Mr. Trump and his team are ready to assume power. Doug?
Mike Emanuel on the North Lawn. Thank you, Mike. Sure. Stocks were mixed today. The Dow finished ahead 59 for a record close again. The S&P 500 also up 2. That's a record as well. NASDAQ fell 6. The death of 5 grade school students in a horrific school bus accident on Monday is renewing concerns about safety aboard those vehicles. Tennessee's governor was in Chattanooga today. He says it's time for new discussions on that. Tennessee does not require school buses to have seat belts. Monday's was the 3rd bus crash in 4 days in that state. Tests show the driver in this case was neither under the influence of alcohol nor drugs. Almost 49 million people are expected to travel 50 miles or more from home during this Thanksgiving holiday weekend, and that means crowded airports, bus stations, and train stations could be inviting targets for terrorists. We have Fox team coverage on that tonight. Jonathan Hunt from Los Angeles International Airport on a huge traffic day there. But we start off with Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge reporting from Washington's Union Station on how Amtrak is tightening security. Good evening, Catherine.
Well, Doug, the goal over the next 5 days is to move a record number of passengers and to keep them safe.
For Amtrak, this is the busiest travel period of the year, with peak days Tuesday, Wednesday, and Sunday. More than 750,000 passengers are expected. At Washington, D.C.'s Union Station, many said they prefer trains over flying, and the visible security presence is not an issue.
I guess I'm kind of neutral to it. I guess in a way it makes you feel a little bit more safe.
I just messaged that to my parents. I was like, there's extra security today for some reason.
I just feel like it's been less of a target, so generally speaking, it seems safer.
To handle the increased passenger flow, Amtrak has more trains running this week and more employees on deck. K-9 teams whose specialty is explosive detection are deployed to quickly and efficiently clear passengers. Rail officials emphasize their security posture is unchanged from last year.
Amtrak police are increasing their presence along with local, state, and federal partners, as well as increasing K-9s throughout the stations and on railways along our right-of-way. That's typical for any holiday. We would always boost our efforts security-wise.
Homeland Security and the TSA are playing a role with specialized crisis response teams that have a surge capability to handle terrorism or criminal activity.
We will have our Viper teams out, agents that work closely with local law enforcement. So you'll see more of that.
At Union Station, teams are also using this crowd scanner technology to detect suspicious devices. The Homeland Security Secretary recently told reporters the global threat environment continues to be high.
We remain concerned about homegrown violent extremists who could strike the homeland with little or no notice.
Also expect more perimeter security at train stations after 2 successful airport attacks overseas, where terrorists used taxis to drop off their bombs.
I came in via bus, and I did see a lot of security outside, so yes, and inside as well.
Amtrak is reminding all passengers to have photo ID because there will be, random security spot checks. And in the last hour or so, Amtrak is now reporting significant delays and congestion in the Northeast Corridor. Doug.
Catherine Harris just up the street at Union Station. Thank you, Catherine. And now to the airports. The lines may be long, the tempers may be short, but that is not stopping millions from flying by air this holiday weekend. Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt is at Los Angeles International Airport.
More than half of the estimated 49 million people traveling this Thanksgiving will do so by air.
So many people, you don't know if there's going to be traffic or there's going to be security lines, so I want to make sure I make it to my flight.
Get here on time or a little bit ahead of time, 2 hours beforehand, everyone should be good to go.
We anticipated that the lines are going to be a little bit longer through security, so we got here a little bit earlier. Just making sure that we're organized.
We headed out early. We're going to New York to go see my parents, and there's no lines are not bad, and we're looking forward to an easy day.
The busiest airports, Atlanta, Chicago, and here in Los Angeles, where some 2.3 million passengers will pass through LAX.
It's going to be a very busy season in Los Angeles, where passenger traffic is up over 8%, so we have all hands on deck.
Extra TSA agents are on duty at airports across the country after criticism over long lines earlier this year. They'll be trying to keep the security lines moving while also keeping everyone safe.
Our men and women on the front lines are on the front lines every day, and they are always looking for that little needle in a haystack. They always have to be on the cutting edge.
Security is obvious, a deliberate show of force to deter attacks and reassure passengers, although officials emphasize there are no credible threats at this stage.
We're constantly checking intelligence sources. We have great relationships with our federal partners here. We're looking for threats. We're doing training virtually every week on whatever might be coming our way.
Roads will be busy too. AAA saying millions of drivers are taking advantage of low gas prices, with the national average today at $2.17.
Drivers have saved more than $28 billion on gas so far this year. And, they're really taking that extra money they're saving at the pump and putting it in their pocket and spending it on a trip this year with their family.
The record numbers traveling through the nation's airports this year are benefiting not just from streamlined screening processes, but also from relatively calm weather, with no widespread delays expected. Doug?
Jonathan Hunt at LAX tonight. Thank you, Jonathan. The federal government wants to keep you from texting and surfing the internet while you are driving. It is asking smartphone makers to develop technology that would lock out most apps when someone is operating a vehicle. Fatal crashes caused by distracted drivers are up almost 9% over 2014. American air power is once again making a big difference in the Iraqi fight to retake Mosul from ISIS terrorists. Correspondent Benjamin Hall has tonight's update.
Jets from the US-led coalition took out a fourth major bridge across the Tigris River in Mosul today, leaving just one open. It's an attempt to cut off ISIS fighters within the city and prevent them resupplying. It's also a reminder of the constant US role in this battle, as every day jets continue to launch from the flight deck of the American carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, operating in the Persian Gulf, ready to strike at any time.
They may have the target ahead of time, or they may receive the target coordinates while they're airborne, and then they would employ the weapon at that time.
So far, they've dropped nearly 1,100 bombs as part of Operation Inherent Resolve, and that won't stop for Thanksgiving. Jennifer Sandifer, who pilots an FA-18E Super Hornet, will be flying a mission during Thanksgiving dinner itself, but says that doesn't matter.
For Thanksgiving specifically, it's just a day you want to spend with family and friends, and that's what we got here. Gunslingers are really my second family.
On the ground, however, their job is made more difficult. In some areas, oil wells still burn uncontrollably. Here, for example, in the formerly ISIS-held town of Gayara, where the terror group have tried to darken the skies and disrupt the view from above. But now, as troops move into the dense urban landscape of Mosul City itself, where so many civilians are being used as human shields, air power is harder to employ, meaning Iraqi forces must carry out the hard work of clearing the city on the ground, street by street. Nevertheless, it must be reassuring to know there's a constant eye in the sky above them, looking down and waiting to help whenever possible. The battle for Mosul is far from over. In fact, some people say it's just beginning. Iraqi troops are still 6 miles from the city centre itself, and from here on out the streets get smaller. The battle will get tougher. But nevertheless, Iraqi troops, with the help of the US, are pushing forward, slowly but surely. Doug?
Benjamin Hall in London tonight. Thank you, Benjamin. The most expensive destroyer ever built for the Navy is not going anywhere for a while. A Navy spokesman says the USS Zumwalt suffered an engineering problem in the Panama Canal and had to be towed to port. The Zumwalt was commissioned last month and is on its way to its home port of San Diego. The 610-foot-long warship cost more than $4.4 billion. Donald Trump picks 2 more for his inner circle. We'll talk about that with the panel when we come back. Well, Donald Trump will be spending the rest of the Thanksgiving holiday through Sunday at his Palm Beach resort, Mar-a-Lago. A new nomination, though, announced today. A couple of them. Betsy DeVos, a longtime GOP activist from Michigan, chair of the Michigan State Republican Party for a number of years, also once described as, quote, a political pit bull for most of Governor Jennifer Granholm's 16-month in office. The Lansing newspaper once said that if DeVos wasn't Granholm's worst nightmare, she was certainly her most persistent. Also a fierce advocate and contributor to school choice, school vouchers, and charter schools, and an opponent of Common Core. A statement from the American Federation of Teachers in the aftermath of her nomination said this: the president-elect in his selection of Betsy DeVos has chosen the most ideological anti-public education nominee put forward since President Carter created a cabinet-level Department of Education. In nominating DeVos, Trump makes it loud and clear that his education policy will focus on destroying public education in America. Let's bring in the panel now. Matthew Continetti, editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon, Heidi Prisbilla, senior political correspondent for USA Today, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Charles, what do you make of Ms. DeVos?
Well, I think it's very encouraging. It's sort of one of these program-specific appointments, and that is, this is Donald Trump's way of saying that he's serious about school choice. Republicans have talked about it for 30 years. The AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, is probably the single most reactionary organization in American life. They have condemned generations of particularly inner city students to really blighted lives as a result of the fact that as a monopoly that they provided the most execrable education. And they look after themselves, which is what unions do. But their pretense to be acting in the public interest is extremely hollow. And this, I think, is a tremendous opportunity because it would make a huge difference in the lives of inner city students. Particularly, it will be an opportunity to demonstrate that conservative ideas can work if implemented. And I think it shows seriousness about policy, which has not been a strong point for the president-elect in the form of this nominee.
Heidi?
Well, let me touch on some other points since you went through kind of the ideological bent. She also has some strong opposition from the other side of the aisle, which is because she wasn't personally a supporter, but she served on the board of a company an organization that did support Common Core. So she's had to kind of try and push back a little bit on that. But I think this is a good sign in the sense that if you look at the totality of how Donald Trump is filling out his cabinet, he's not just going with loyal insiders. She wasn't someone who was by his side throughout the whole march of the campaign. But she does know a lot about the issues and a lot about education, and I think that she could do a fine job in this role. One other thing, though, it does also show how difficult it is to keep that campaign pledge of draining the swamp, whatever that means, just because she's been in GOP politics a long time. She comes from a big donor family, but you want people who are experienced at the same time. You've got to strike that balance.
She is very, very wealthy indeed. I just saw a picture of the family yacht, which is, I think, 140 feet, something like that. It's pretty big. Anyway, Matthew, she was an early supporter, by the way, of Common Core, but I think that she pulled away from that as she saw it in practice and in evolution.
Well, the first rule of being in a cabinet is if you have a position separate from the president, you know who wins. The president. And so I think she'll back President-elect Trump's position on Common Core if she's confirmed by the Senate. Looking at the Trump administration as it's taking shape, it's very similar to the Reagan administration, where you kind of had the ideological conservatives who made up the core of the Reagan movement. But then you also had establishment Republicans like Jim Baker, who kind of came on board after Reagan was elected and tried to steer the ship of state in a little bit more of a traditional way. And you're seeing that exactly with these latest picks. You have the White House is going to be pretty Trumpy, but the cabinet agencies at large, I think, are going to have more establishment Republicans than people might expect.
I want to talk a little bit about the remarkable reconciliation we are seeing with so many of Trump's former opponents or critics. Listen to what Nikki Haley, who is now the U.S. ambassador, or certainly will be the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, what she had to say about Donald Trump earlier in the campaign.
Donald Trump is everything I taught my children not to do in kindergarten. We are talking about a man who has filed for bankruptcy 4 times. We can't afford for a man to go in as president and bankrupt our country.
And now Donald Trump's Thanksgiving message, or at least a portion of it today.
We've just finished a long and bruising political campaign. Emotions are raw and tensions just don't heal overnight. It doesn't go quickly, unfortunately. But we have before us the chance now to make history together, to bring real change to Washington, real safety to our cities, and real prosperity to our communities, including our inner cities.
Heidi, what do you make of this reconciliation?
She's not the only one, right? He's also talking to Mitt Romney, and the concern was, frankly, with his first couple of appointments, that he was going to just go with loyalists and pass over people who might present a more diversified cabinet. And so I think it does show from that sense that he's an adult, that he's willing to at least talk to these folks and appoint some of them. I think with Nikki Haley in particular, the question is going to come down to experience, just because she does not have any experience in foreign policy and international relations, and frankly, neither does Donald Trump. So the main selling point that he gave to the American people was that I may not have experience, but I'm a great manager and I'm going to bring in people who do. That said, I don't think she's going to have any problem getting Senate confirmation.
You mentioned Mitt Romney. There's still some conflict there. A lot of Republicans pushing back, apparently pushing back against that. Let's listen to Mike Huckabee and what he had to say about the Romney pick.
But I'm still very unhappy that Mitt did everything he could to derail Donald Trump. He attacked him on a personal level about his character, integrity, his honor. Well, when you do that, there's only one way that I think Mitt Romney could even be considered for a post like that, and that is that he goes to a microphone in a very public place and repudiates everything he said in that famous Salt Lake City speech and everything he said after that.
Charles, we got about 30 seconds.
It's encouraging that Trump appears to be neglecting and contradicting that kind of advice. His job now, his objective now, is to put together a successful presidency, to vindicate all the people who support him, and to show that he can do what he said he would do. If it turns out that Mitt Romney is the best for that job, given the other candidates that we've heard about, he's certainly somebody you might want. He should pick him and show that he can overcome the previous animosity. So I think we're going to learn a lot from Trump by what he does on this appointment.
Coming up next, how some Democrats are still working to get Hillary Clinton in the White House.
We have seen that our nation is more deeply divided than we thought. But I still believe in America, and I always will. And if you do, then we must accept this result and then look to the future. Donald Trump is going to be our president. We owe him an open mind and the chance to lead.
Well, not so fast. Gabe Sherman, writing in New York Magazine today, says, quote, Hillary Clinton is being urged by a group of prominent computer scientists and election lawyers to call for a recount in 3 swing states that were